Templars. I'm Dylan Lewis Monroe, aka A145, the Map Maker. Back after a little, about 2 week hiatus since I have talked about current events. We were on the Screw Big Gov marathon last week talking about brain machine interfaces, but we've got a lot to discuss from over the past 2 weeks, with some of the top stories being the tariff mania that has been the top story in all the world ever since Liberation Day, April 2nd. I want to specifically in this video address this debate that's been ongoing between the Blackpillers and the hopium dealers, and kind of state where I stand in that, because I've got to say I have not been feeling, the most trust the planny lately. But I am not in the full-on black pill camp either. So I want to go into that a little bit. And of course, that relates to the other news from yesterday, which is Bibi Netanyahu's second visit to the White House in under 3 months, which I find a little bit strange and unusual. We'll talk about that, and then talk about the big hands-off protests that happened last Saturday, April 5th. For us conservatives and Trump supporters, it's really came out of nowhere. We didn't hear any preparatory talk about this. All of a sudden, it's like all over the country, all these protests. So very much like BLM, Antifa, George Floyd, Save Gaza. It's like this is the new thing, hands-off protest. So those are the themes of the video tonight. Of course, there's a bunch of other smaller stories and things that I passed over the past 2 weeks, but I want to keep this one pretty succinct. And let's start off talking about black pill versus hopium dealer. Where do I stand? I have been feeling a little bit like not wanting to make a video, because it's like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I'm not here to bring anyone down or confuse anyone, or just say that I'm confused, which kind of is the case. But, I do have opinions about all these things, and, maybe it's better to just speak about it from the heart than just say nothing, because, I am a voice in this movement, and I see so many people just latching on to, like, it's the Jews, or like Trump's Illuminati, or then the other hand of just saying everything's fake, that trust the plan, all these wars aren't even happening, everyone's wearing a latex mask. The Q reality has become so far from the normie perception that it's become almost embarrassed to be associated with it. At least for me, it's like, if everyone else is seeing Trump looking like a warmonger, even on the surface, even how he's presenting himself to the public is in a lot of ways looking like he is submitting to the Jews, being a warmonger, attacking Yemen. Even if in the world of special operations and conspiracies, we believe that some of these things aren't really happening. Maybe that Bibi's already been replaced by a white hat stand-in. Whether these wars are happening or not in Ukraine and Gaza and Yemen, unless you can convince people, unless you have evidence that some of this stuff is actually fake, it's becoming harder to be openly supportive of this agenda, when on the surface level that the normies are seeing, it does seem like it's gone pretty far sideways from the campaign promises. But why am I personally feeling a little bit black-pilled is not the same reasons as why most of these other bigger channels are talking about why, they're turning on Trump. And I'm not turning on Trump. I'm just been feeling a little bit black-pilled in general, even from my own personal experiences in life that I've been talking about here. And, part of that stems from what I mentioned 2 videos back with my experience with the electrician and like digging on these local, in quote, companies doing home services, finding their parent companies and going all the way up to these huge private equity firms in New York, when all this has been happening since 2019, pretty much. All these corporate mergers that we've seen, overlapping Trump's first term and the Biden administration, like these things that really look like the world has been moving in that direction of the World Economic Forum, New World Order, or corporatocracy. And so I'm a little bit black-pilled on the fact that corporatocracy seems to be expanding unimpeded. However, I just see the executive orders that Trump signed today, and there was one about preventing corporatocracy, preventing monopolies, helping small businesses. I'm not sure how far that will go. I'd have to hear it again to hear exactly what was said. But that's a concern of mine. And then, what I mentioned on the Screw Big Gov marathon about the brain machine interfaces, that, kind of in tandem with the corporatocracy and the technocracy, that, these technologies are being deployed on us that most people are just completely unaware of. And this falls kind of in line with my crusade against 5G and smart devices that's been ongoing really heavily since 2020, when 5G was really rolled out, when everyone's home was switched out with smart meters. And, we're pretty far into this technocracy that the New World Order had envisioned. And I'm not sure how much brakes the white hats are pumping on it when no one's even really talking about these things. I did actually want to follow up and make even a full video or a diagram or a sticker or some kind of activism about the brain machine interface technology that is being deployed, the N3 programs, as DARPA calls them, which is non-invasive types of brain machine interfaces that is clear in the targeted ads we're seeing on these social media apps. And no one's talking about it. And, I do have concerns that, a large chunk or the whole of humanity is headed into this technocracy where people are just going to be essentially drones being driven by these tech companies through brain machine interfaces. And that's how a lot of people already seem. And, maybe that has something to do with all these people showing up for these hands-off protests with all their little handmade signs that happen to have all the same slogans on them. Maybe that explains a little bit of what we consider TDS and what we consider, the liberal hive mind. Not to say that conservatives don't also somewhat have of a hive mind, but the brain machine interfaces developed by DARPA, deployed through smart devices, Apple, and then also these apps like Facebook, Meta, Snapchat, and I'm sure TikTok as well, feeding our brain machine data captured to China, has me concerned. And so I'm going to work on raising awareness about that. So all these subjects tonight really tie in together. It's like the liberals could be being brain machine controlled by these devices to do their little protests, while at the same time, these truthers could be, or conservatives could be brain machine controlled into supporting this administration, no matter what they do. And that also ties into another reason maybe why I'm feeling slightly black-pilled, is the newly released Pentagon budget. So let's pull up a couple images here. We have to go with some of these themes we're talking about. That Trump has announced that he wants a $1 trillion Pentagon budget, which is, I think, about 200 or 150 million more, or sorry, billion more than the previous Pentagon budget, which was, I think, in the 800 billion range. So it's like, is these numbers just reflective of inflation? Is it really we're spending the same amount? Why are we spending so much if this is a peacetime president? It just seems like in a lot of ways, as good as Trump is on a lot of social issues, that the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned of seems to still be fairly going strong. And that always was, I mean, our country had a lot of problems, but that was always one of the biggest ones. And that's been my concern from the beginning about the Q operation of, if this Q operation, I mean, taking down pedophile rings and Satanists is one thing, but a military operation to either take down or reduce the military, I've had concerns about the logic there, if it's even possible. So it does seem as though the military-industrial complex is strong and possibly exerting a little bit more control over Trump than we as pacifist truthers would like. Now, why am I still red-pilled, and why am I not fully black-pilled and turning on Trump and the administration like so many other truthers are so eager to do, it would seem? Well, I do still believe in the whole QAnon premise. I wouldn't say I believe in it, but I'm aware of it. And I'm aware of special operations, and I'm aware of the history of the CIA, and that there are competing factions within the cabal. And so, everyone wants to look at this as dark versus light, good defeating evil. But I think more realistically, we need to look at this as a more pro future, pro humanity group taking out a more anti-human, possibly even reptilian satanic group. And so, neither is maybe pure good or pure evil, but just has different perspectives on where they want the world to go. And it would seem that, Trump's agenda, at least as stated, was better. Now, is that being taken off course or not? I think maybe I'm not going to say one way or the other. I think it's definitely taking longer than most of us would have hoped, but I'm not sure if it's really gone off course. I would say even just the Biden administration itself was a little bit off course. We didn't want to take a 4-year break just to show people instead of tell them, but we did. And in retrospect, I think that did have the effect of waking a lot more people up, getting more support behind Trump to avoid a civil war scenario. And I think a lot of what we're looking at is trying to clean things up behind the scenes and prepare the public for the next stage of things to avoid more civil unrest, like we saw with the hands-off protests. And another thing to always keep in mind, which relates to the protocols of the Elders of Zion and this idea that, maybe Jews are controlling Trump and the deep state itself, is that we want to avoid the negative faction, the deep state faction, using their Samson option, which is essentially a scorched earth policy on their way out the door, out of power, out of the planet, off this plane of existence, that they have rigged many things and they still have high technologies, nuclear and beyond, that could do a lot of damage to our planet and to human life if we don't deal with them in a very surgical way. And so while, we would love to see white hats storming into Geneva, Switzerland, and storming into Silicon Valley and just taking over everything, these people have backup plans. They have bunkers. They have buried nukes. They have satellite weapons. And so we're taking things very slowly and very cautiously to avoid those Samson options being deployed. And we even have an example just from the past 2 weeks of what I think is essentially a Samson option being deployed with what we saw in Myanmar, the terrible earthquakes that happened in Myanmar, which happens to be a country that went through a political process that seemed to be very much similar to what we think is going on behind the scenes in America, with an election that was stolen by a globalist candidate, an overt military coup that took that leader out of power and installed an interim government, and now the country is considered to be in a state of civil war. And that was about 2 years ago, I believe. And so now we see 2 years later, as this, what would ostensibly be like a white hat military government trying to run this country, is now faced with total destruction, a 7 magnitude earthquake that, if you look, I had a picture of the actual chart of where this earthquake struck. But if you see a map of Myanmar, the most heavy damage from the earthquake is essentially the entire country. It's like struck right in the center of this country. Of course, it is the Ring of Fire. This region is prone to earthquakes, but it just seems very convenient for the deep state and somewhat out of the ordinary that such a strong earthquake would hit a country that happens to be in a civil war that's had a military coup happen. It does seem like we have one side that was losing a bit of power that decided to use more exotic weapons, not necessarily to regain power, but to destabilize the country. And the damage from this earthquake may exceed the entire GDP of Myanmar itself. And so it's going to be a very difficult recovery. This could even result in decades of economic stagnation for the country and reverse development, essentially. Now, so I think I've presented a decent case of why I'm feeling a little bit black-pilled, but also hopeful at the same time, and understanding that these operations take time. But of course, there's a lot of other influencers who are taking, I would say, a more simplistic view of things and just saying that Trump is controlled by the Jews, or that that's pretty much what most of them are saying, like that he's controlled by the Jews. And so we have seen, some, I wouldn't say evidence of that, because I believe that the white hats may be staging some of these things in order to bring up Jewish control in our government in more of a public dialogue and make it more commonplace that people do discuss these things, because it may all be heading towards a Israel for last scenario. Not saying that Trump will institute another Holocaust or anything, but that, eventually we may turn on Israel as our quote unquote closest ally. And so people were sharing around this image of Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, standing behind Trump, sort of looking like he may be puppeteering him, comparing it to, who is that? I want to say Blinken. I'm not sure, though, but someone in Biden's cabinet, overlooking his shoulder, controlling him. This was actually on a visit to Israel, I believe. And, comparing this to some old German propaganda posters, which of course this has been translated, but showing that behind enemy powers is these Jewish bankers. And so while, all these, we've been told and programmed our whole lives that all these German propaganda posters are anti-Semitic, and now a lot of people are seeing truthers and just conservatives alike. I wouldn't say so much liberals, even though liberals are now on the Save Palestine, Free Gaza campaign. A lot of people are seeing now that there actually is Jewish faction, banker, AIPAC control in our government, and that it seems to be a conflict of interest. A couple other prominent black pillars that have been making a lot of chatter this week, these two, Candace Owens and Ian Carroll. Ian Carroll being the new superstar of the truth movement, who just came out of nowhere, or maybe out of TikTok, and has just taken over. He's like the voice of truth now, apparently. Who made him that is my question. He's been on Joe Rogan, now he's with Candace Owens. It's like he's gone to the top level from, not even having a professional background in media. So it's very artificial. I would say he's definitely a plant. I have questions about virtually everyone in the truth movement. If the truth movement, much of it is actually an extension of the original CIA Mockingbird media. There certainly are media groups and, certain media personalities that will associate with other alt media personalities exclusively. And who is controlling all of it at the end of the day? Some would say the white hats, some would say the CIA. It's all about looking into who's really controlling these groups and these media groups and who do they really work for. And, typically it is the CIA. So another one that kind of surprised me that came out, with very negative statements about Trump here, Mike Adams, the health ranger, who said in this tweet, "This is really a trade embargo of China camouflaged as a tariff. The USA did the same thing to Japan before Pearl Harbor attack, in effect provoking Pearl Harbor. This seems to be Trump's plan with China. Trump wants a two-front war during which he can concentrate power in Washington, D.C., end the First Amendment, and appease Israel, hand out $1 trillion to weapon manufacturers, print endless currency, and impoverish the nation under debt and war, make America broke again." Wow, Mike Adams, I never know which side he's really on. He kind of flip-flops. I thought he's been MAGA in the past, but now he's thinking Trump is trying to bring us into World War III. I think that he is way, way off in this assessment. We got to remember, Trump sometimes likes to beat his chest and beat the war drums to sort of scare our enemies. And then sometimes it just amounts to nothing, like with North Korea and all that Rocket Man talk back in 2017 and 2018. And so, while it is concerning that we're supposedly bombing Yemen and he's making very bold statements about Iran, I do not believe that Trump is going to bring us into World War III. And I think this is pretty irresponsible, journalism and tweeting on behalf of the Health Ranger to even suggest this. But, everyone's entitled to their opinion. I just think there's certain media outlets that like to sort of fan the flames and exaggerate things more than it really needs to be. Now, on the flip side of things, we have the hopium dealers, which I much prefer listening to hopium dealers than to the Blackpillers, and I even agree with them more. But sometimes I question whether, what their motive is. And the big one in the deep Q alt media that, doesn't even venture into YouTube territory is this Mike King, who now appears on weekly broadcasts on Patriot Underground as well as News Treason. I like to listen to what he has to say. He's someone who is, I would say, 100% confident of this plan. Everything that's negative about Trump is actually something positive. It's all the art of war, appear weak when you're strong. Mike King claims that the war in Gaza is completely fake, like no one's dying, no civilians are dying there, as well as this bombardment of Yemen that's going on, as well as the war in Ukraine is, according to him, he's saying it's like 90% fake. And, I would like to see the evidence. It's definitely possible. In this week's video, he was talking a lot about the movie Wag the Dog, in which was a Hollywood movie that actually showed a presidential a president in a presidential campaign who had some negative press come out about him and asked a Hollywood director to fake a war in order to take the attention off of his scandal. And that was released in 1997. And it really, makes you think that this is a possibility, that between psychological operations, special effects, and controlled media, it is certainly possible that we could have a completely fake war that is broadcast to the world, and people don't even really know, especially when it's in or about a remote region or an isolated region like Gaza. And even more so today with AI technology. If the AI technology we're seeing as civilians and have access to is making videos and images as good as it is, the military using AI technology could definitely stage a fake war and have as many clips of as many headless babies and mutilated bodies as they possibly could want. And we wouldn't know the difference. And so we really are living in a world where nobody really knows what is real anymore. And so it's hard to say, what we should support, which wars we should protest against. And, if it's a fake war, there's no point in protesting against it if it's really just a psychological operation to say, eventually dissolve our alliance with Israel, or, who knows what the ultimate goal is for all these different things. But it's just hard to know. Like the psychological operations are paramount in all these wars. It's used to be a psychological operation to get people to actually support the war. And under the new white hats, it could be psychological operations to actually get people opposing these wars. But I don't know. I think that Mike may be a little bit overconfident, and I'm not of the belief that all these wars are completely fake, but I do acknowledge the possibility that we could be seeing AI and CGI and who knows what, and actors, crisis actors, essentially. One of his premises is that if false flags are staged, such as Sandy Hook and many others, could the whole war be staged as well? And I would say yes, it definitely could, but it's really hard to know if it really is or not. But I would say also that it's a little bit strange on some of these channels that I actually like, these channels like Patriot Underground. It's a little strange. They have like 78,000 subscribers, and then these videos with Mike King are getting like almost as many views. And, typically videos get fewer views than the actual channel. Like, for example, New Templars gets, 2 to 3,000 views per video when we have 17,000 subscribers. Like, if we got 17,000 views on a video, I'd probably die of shock. But it's just, as a content creator myself, I observe these things, and it makes me wonder who is really putting Mike King out there to do these things. He claims to be independent. He has his website. He makes his books. But what kind of partnership or deal did he make with Patriot Underground and News Treason to have a an hour-long segment on both these channels with 78,000 subscribers every single week, in which he's given like a 10-minute segment just to promote his own website? It's I just question how all these things work. And like I said, there are media groups that work with exclusively people within their own media group. I mean, and then there's independent journalists, which is a kind of different phenomenon. And I'm lucky that anyone even invites me on to group broadcasts like Lewis Herms did last week on the Truth Marathon. That's how I know when someone really is an independent journalist, if they invite me on, and if they act normal, with me. But I know I question whether a lot of these other bigger Q channels, especially like X22, the other big one being Badlands Media, and of course Jordan Sather. Badlands Media seems to be a somewhat artificially created media group that may, have ties back to the CIA, or maybe it's the white hat CIA. Whether there even are white hats versus black hats, maybe it's all just one CIA that's running, white hat operations and black hat operations at the same time. That would be very Protocols of the Elders of Zion-esque. But, I'm just raising awareness of all these things. And, sometimes I wonder if I am the only truly independent journalist out there. But no, I'm sure I'm not. But when I see, who's invited to these different expos and who's invited on the which channels, you start to see these media groups forming. And it does seems to be much like the mainstream media, a lot of things controlled from a higher place. So that's things just to all consider. And let's see, just thinking about everything that's been going on the past few weeks, especially the second meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, which you see there. Not thrilled to see that, but there has to be a purpose. And what I'm seeing is that the white hats, or, the Trump administration, is deploying media narratives that are going through cycles. And you can think of it like the cycles of a washing machine that are actually de-brainwashing the normies and forcing them to wake up. So something like Bibi Netanyahu coming for the second time in 3 months, which seems completely unnecessary. It's important to analyze every detail of this and figure out what are the differences between the first time and the second time. What are the hidden comms? And so I watched this whole meeting twice, at least most of it for the second time. I watched the whole thing once and then most of it the second time. And wasn't picking up on too many comms that were like overtly Q references, other than, of course, the whole purpose of the second meeting being to discuss the 17% tariff that Trump put on Israel. So, of course, 17 is like, this whole second meeting is based on a Q, essentially. And so to say, there's no Q reference. Of course, there's a Q reference. The whole meeting is about a Q reference. And now, is this even the original Bibi Netanyahu? All the body language is looking like Trump is, Bibi's little bitch, essentially, which I don't know why he's agreeing to this, but I think it is to encourage a public dialogue about Jewish control over our government and things like AIPAC and our relationship with Israel, to sort of slowly turn the tide of public conversation against those things, to eventually pull essentially a rug pull on Israel itself. So you see a lot of these expressions. Like, let's look at the expressions in this photo alone. It's like a sort of greedy exuberance on Netanyahu's face and a sort of reluctant frustration on Trump's face. I may play the clip in this video like I had in the intro of his first meeting when Trump pulled out the chair, or actually pushed in the chair for Bibi Netanyahu, when he's signing what I believe is the White House guest book. People are looking at that body language again, and of course saying that, Trump is owned by the Jews. But it was strange this time that they actually canceled the main press conference. So if you'll remember the first time Bibi visited, they did their meeting in the Oval Office in front of the fireplace, which is its own press conference. Both of them speak. They take questions from the press. Strangely, during this one, the both of them spoke. Bibi spoke fairly briefly, and then Trump was taking all kinds of random questions from the press, not even having anything to do with Bibi or Israel, and he was just kind of sitting there in silence. But then the first time they met, about a month ago, that meeting was followed up by the big meeting in, the golden, larger press briefing room, where it was like a joint press conference. They both stood at podiums, and Trump announced that the USA would be taking control of Gaza. I believe during this meeting that happened on Monday, that was supposed to happen, but it was canceled for some reason that is not being reported. And so there really isn't much reported on this at all, since it's something that didn't happen. There's not usually reports on things that don't happen. But some people are mentioning this, saying that the White House has not given a reason so far as to why the presser with Netanyahu was suddenly canceled. Pool reporters are gathering to enter the Oval. No new timing has been issued. Marker 9, first arrest. So I think that's a little bit of a stretch, saying that Bibi's been arrested because they canceled a press conference. So I asked Grok, and I said, was the big press conference with Bibi Monday canceled? He said yes, and obviously not exactly giving a reason. But what's interesting is that the previous time that that a foreign leader met with Trump in the Oval Office, and then the big press conference was actually canceled, was when Zelensky was there. And we all know how that went. They got in a big argument publicly in front of the cameras, and then the press conference that was scheduled for later in the bigger gold room was canceled. So since Bibi's bigger meeting or bigger conference was canceled, does that suggest, now they didn't get in a fight on camera here, but does that suggest that possibly in their private talks after the press was escorted out, was there some kind of disagreement that resulted in the bigger press conference being canceled? I mean, are we even talking about two foreign leaders having a actual conversation and negotiating here, or are these both white hat actors? Because I think of all the people out there that are potentially maskers or replaced by white hat stand-ins or clones, that Bibi is so high on the list. I would say Biden's probably the highest on the list, and Bibi is up there. As evil as he is, it seems like this is someone that the White Hats would have gotten to by now, and including the fact that he has had all those trials in Israel for his own corruption, that he was even ousted as prime minister for a very, very brief period and then came back into prime minister. These things hint to me that, Bibi is a high probability of someone who has been replaced. So essentially, I would say, if I were to really put my money on, what's really the dynamic here, is that this whole meeting with Israel for a second time is essentially a pantomime, a charade, to spark conversations in the alt media and even in the mainstream, that Trump is owned by Israel, and to create sort of a public frustration or a public anger towards Israel, and start introducing this dialogue of Israel may need to be dealt with and is not necessarily our closest partner, even though on the surface they continually say Trump's the best friend of Israel and all this. The amount that they drum that up and play that up, it almost seems fake. You know what I mean? It's like when you have to say it that many times, it almost starts being like, well, is it really that case? Or is this a case of keeping your friends close and your enemies closer? And this enemy in this instance, may even be a fake enemy that's already been dealt with, that's been replaced by either a mask or a clone or a white hat operative. So that is the second BB meeting with Israel. And now I want to talk some about the tariffs. This is a headline from New York Post saying, World War fee, Trump puts tariffs on nearly all imported goods. And just the more recent news as of today is that Trump put all the tariffs except China on pause. So this thing has been going back and forth like you wouldn't even believe. It's like every other day we have the hardest drop in the stock market, followed by today, like the biggest pump in the stock market in a very long time. But that essentially means the stock market didn't move. If it went down one day and up the next day, Trump's claiming like the stock market did really good today. Like, no, it just evened out from the day before. But Trump is describing this in some very strange terminology, such as sort of likening it to, metaphorically calling it like a surgical operation. The operation is over, the patient lived and is healing. Prognosis is that the patient will be far stronger, bigger and better and more resilient than ever before, talking about America itself and, the pain it has gone through in terms of the economy and the stock market with introducing these tariffs. And now today, while Trump paused the tariffs on most countries, he raised the tariff on China to something insane like 125%. Trump also tweeted just today, this is my most recent data from this entire video from today. Trump tweeted or truthed out that this is a great time to buy. So hint, hint, I believe that is hinting that we may have just seen the bottom of the current dip caused by the tariffs. I'd say it's looking like that may be the case in crypto, but of course, you never really know. And you can't even always trust Trump to give you insider financial advice on the markets. But this was a very bloody day in crypto. I think this was last Sunday before the stock markets reopened on Monday, the Monday after the weekend after the tariffs were introduced on a Wednesday. We saw huge dips in almost every of the top coins, even 20% dip at one point in XRP, which is not the best, but almost all of this has rebounded since. And so it's essentially just been extremely volatile, is what you call it. And not even just in American markets. This was from 2 days ago. China's stock market suffered the worst single day crash since 2008. And I'm not sure if that will rebound, since China is the only one that actually is still getting hit with such a high tariff rate on the US. And actually, the Chinese tariff is probably the most important one of all, since virtually every product you buy in America has that label made in China on it. So really that is, I would say, by far the most important country in terms of the tariffs. And now, do I support these tariffs? Do I believe that this is going to make the economy better? This is one of those things where even top economists that have, studied these things and gone to Harvard and Yale and, studied all about it, even the top people in this field will probably disagree on, whether this is the right move or not. I do think that we'll just have to see. I definitely don't think that Trump is going to permanently crash the economy. I mean, he did so well in his first term with building the economy. I think he knows how to build it. But we want not just fake numbers in the stock market. We want actual industry and jobs in America, and not following the globalist New World Order agenda of outsourcing all of our manufacturing to other countries. We want true independence, and sovereignty is, making some of this stuff, making our essentials here. I mean, we got to the point where we were even buying steel for our military aircraft and ships from China, and they were sabotaging our steel and making it weak so that their military could defeat ours if it ever did come to kinetic confrontation between the two countries. And so I'll say I support the Maestro in this. It is a little bit rough going through this transition phase and seeing the stock markets this volatile, but I think that ultimately, I do think this golden age plan is realistic and that we're going to get there. Not sure if it will be in, these 4 years, if we'll really get there or not, or just start making progress towards that. But, we have all these companies building factories coming back to America. I'm fairly confident that this plan will work out in favor of the Maestro in the end. And it's of course important to pull back and look at the bigger picture here, which is really what I like to do in all my investment personally is look at the all-time charts. And, you see here the chart of the S&P 500 since 1960 and these many, many little mini crashes we've seen along the way. But ultimately, like this meme says, it has always returned on average 10% per year since 1950. And so while we're seeing extreme volatility right now, I do think that long term, Trump will be able to, keep this long-term increase in the S&P 500. And if we're talking about a golden age, we could be even looking at a whole new economic model and, possibly even more growth than, exponential growth potentially. But we'll just have to see, and I'm not sure. There's a lot of discussion if Howard Lutnick knows what he's doing, Secretary of Commerce, because I think a lot of these tariff policies have sort of been his idea. And he is, of course, the Jewish, one of the richest men in Washington, a big, banker type, private equity investment firm type guy. And do I trust him? Not 100%. But if the Maestro is trusting him, I think that the golden age is a definite possibility. And so we'll just have to see. But yeah, we had a lot of news about, the Dow slid 300 points right after Trump introduced the tariffs. The session was a wild one as traders tried to speculate when the market would bottom from Trump's turmoil, with the Dow posting its largest intraday point swing ever recorded. I believe that was between Wednesday and Thursday. We had some slightly funny headlines like this one saying that Trump just doesn't give a fuck. Even though I know I've said that in my own videos, I don't think he just doesn't give a fuck about the economy. I think he really is trying to save America. And the only way is to let a little bit of gas out of this massively pumped up and fakely inflated stock market to actually create real jobs and force companies to come back to America, reversing decades of globalist policy that encouraged companies to offshore all of their production. So wondering, there was also this Economist cover showing Trump with, gasoline standing on top of a pile of dollars. And it seems like that's happening a little bit, but I think ultimately it will be reversed. And so I think this truth from Trump, just from today, saying it's a great time to buy, is a pretty strong indication that we may be seeing the bottom. Me personally, I've actually been loading up on Tesla stock because looking at the chart, I did feel like the Tesla stock looked like it had reached a bottom. And even though it's been very volatile over the past entire week, I'm essentially breaking even on what I've been putting in since 1 week ago. And so I think that, it may be the bottom and a good time to buy both cryptos and stocks. And especially in crypto, especially in the ISO coins like XRP, we may have ended the bull trap and we're about to enter into the bear trap. And we're about to enter into the big bull run where XRP and other ISO coins and altcoins may go parabolic. Before we get into the rest of the news, I want to take a quick little break to talk about Deep State Mapping Project, the operation that keeps the new Templars running. And I'm going to take you on a quick little guided tour of the crystal section that we have just finished listing the crystals acquired since the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show back in February. And so this is the homepage of deepstatemappingproject.com. And from here, you can sign up for our newsletter. If you scroll down right there, just pop in your email address. We send about one newsletter a week. And then to find the crystals, you go up to store, down to crystals, and click on crystals to see the whole crystal section. And it's by default sorted by popularity. For this video, I like to sort it by latest, so you can see the latest ones I listed. And here are the latest. You see there, the Crystal Skull is the newest one I've listed, which is one of the biggest, best pieces I got in Tucson this year. It comes with an LED light stand that does multi-color. So you can do the rainbow color, white, or red, or blue. And this skull is very big. It's about 6 inches long, and just love it. I want to keep it for myself, but I'm going to try to give it away. If that's a little too much for you, we have some cheaper pieces like the quartz points, and I love these fairy fortresses that I found, which is spirit quartz in a cluster. And so as you scroll down, you'll see some other quartz points. And one of the newer finds is this thing I'm calling dark fairy quartz, which is somewhat similar to fairy quartz, but it is actually lithium hematite laser quartz. And so it kind of is clear quartz with a black hue and this metallic silver lithium sparkle on the surface that is just very magical, very special. I had never seen it before this trip, and so it's a new specimen to me. I kept one of these for myself, and we have 6 others that we are selling. So check that out. Something a little bit different. They're all raw points. We got this brachiated jasper in tower form, and several, as you can see, several of the quartz points. One smoky quartz points, that's actually a pretty big one. We got lapis pyramids that are very cool. And then down at the bottom here is the biggest quartz points, which all come with light stands. These are the real statement piece showstoppers, the giant quartz polished obelisks. So this would be like the statement piece next to your bed or in your office to get you tapped into that Mother Nature universal mind. So now we're getting into some of the crystal bracelets that we have added the light code charm to. We've restrung all of these in-house. These are high quality gemstone bracelets, A quality gems, not just the run of the mill, the little $5 stuff you find in a big basket. These are like top quality gemstones and in very limited quantities as well. Some of these we only have 2 samples. But now moving on to the bread and butter of D.S.M.P is, of course, the posters and the packets and prints. The World Hierarchy Pyramid got a little bit of free publicity last week when the YouTuber ContraPoints opened her video, which has, last time I checked, 2 million views. And she did a whole walkthrough of this diagram, even though she was being a little bit insulting about it. Any publicity is good publicity. And so this is becoming more widely known online. Unfortunately, the plagiarism is rampant as well, but you guys definitely want it in poster format is the original intended and best format to get that artwork. And then, of course, our flagship product is the Intel packet, where you get an assortment of all the most important D.S.M.P artworks, including some of our newest stickers. And you get 2 mini posters with this, including the brand new Maestro Map diagram. So some of the new stickers included are the eagle in gold and the mini light code 12-piece set and the silver mirror Sephiroth map sticker. So that is all included. And of course, we have other packets. This one is sort of our central one that has our most quote unquote important artworks, but many others. And last one I want to mention here is our second newest highly complex diagram, which is the Infinite Life Vortex. You're looking at it here in folded mini poster format. It's also sold unfolded. But my favorite version of this artwork, and by the way, if you want to see the other versions of any artwork, just scroll down to related products on any product listing, and you'll see the other sizes and formats of the artwork. My favorite format of this one is the 40-inch large format lithograph print, which would be like the statement piece in your healing room or living room or healing space. So check all that out. I got a few new posters behind me as well. We got the Ashtar timeline, the New World Order CIA timeline there, and the newly framed in a beautiful gold frame D.Web 24 by 36 inch. So we even sell the neon. We even sell this t-shirt. Actually, we have also, one last thing I'll mention here. We got the new Crash Jasara t-shirt. So the Crash has always been a part of the Jasara theory that there needed to be some kind of a stock market crash in order for there to be a liquidity crisis, in order for XRP to be the resolution to that liquidity crisis. And I'm hoping that's what we're seeing right now, and that we just hit the bottom, and that from now on it is going to be Golden Age Jasara. If there's a little more turbulence, don't be surprised, but check out the Crash t-shirt. I definitely love this t-shirt, and it will be a memento for having survived the tumultuous financial markets of 2025, when we are all crypto billionaires and living in the golden age. So get the Crash t-shirt from deepstatemappingproject.com. Link in the description. The Crash t-shirt will be in the t-shirt section, of course, and you can sort by latest will be the best way to find it. So once again, check all that out, deepstatemappingproject.com. Like the video, subscribe, and hit the newsletter. All right, now on to the last couple stories here. So the big story on April 5th was this nationwide hands-off protest that erupted in all these different cities and more, protesting against essentially Trump and Musk. And the theme of this protest, like their slogan was hands off, which I find fairly ironic. You know, this could have multiple meanings, of course, but it seemed like the theme is like hands off my government. Like your government's trying to do all this good stuff for you, and menial little Trump and Musk are trying to take away our sweet, loving government that has done nothing but try to save people's lives and protect us and make life wonderful and support the American dream, which is, of course, the most fucking retarded thing I've ever heard in my life. And so reading about this from an article from NPR, they were saying that demonstrators gathered across the country on Saturday, many animated by differing issues, but united in opposition to the Trump administration with a single message: hands off. Organizers said more than 1,300 hands-off rallies, varying sizes, took place on Saturday. So that alone should tell you that some kind of massive an NGO, you know, obviously most likely Soros funded, organized this. Because I mean, who in the grassroots would have organized 1,300 separate protests in various cities at the same time? I mean, that alone tells you that this is some kind of a globalist operation. And now people like Mike King are actually saying that this has been commandeered by the white hats themselves, that like Trump and the white hats are actually staging protests against themselves, which I could rationalize that logic, but it's so insane that it's just, some of these things make me think that the white hats are, you know, following not just the art of war, but the protocols of Zion a little too closely. But we have some, I mean, this whole thing is just so ridiculous and so humiliating, and just puts on display how stupid these people really are at this point. They're fighting for both nothing and for their own destruction. And as you see, many of them are even still wearing masks. I'll give some credit to the organizers of this that the signs do appear to have enough non-uniformity that it somewhat appears to be like a grassroots movement. But obviously, whoever actually organized this and booked the speakers, booked the permits for this, and notified people, organized it on like a newsletter level or however it was organized, that they gave them at least autonomy to create their own signs. But these do seem like, well, you just don't know, and people are bussed in. Some of these are completely fake protesters that are being paid to be there, but I think a good portion of them are probably actual libtards that voted for Kamala, that made their own signs, that just have TDS syndrome, late stage TDS. So I found some pictures from this. There was actually from not any mainstream media source, but actually from someone I personally follow. It was actually a burlesque dancer in New York. And these photos that she posted was so ironic that I just had to save them. And so this is the first one. Now, if you can't see the irony, I might have to explain it to you, but it says, stop billionaires, war on Medicaid and Medicare. What's it say smaller there? Workers' World Party. Well, first of all, that sounds like globalism and communism. Workers' World Party. What is that? Like a international union? What does her hat say? More life. Stop Trump. Corruption. FYI, Trump and Elon are trying to actually end the corruption in all these agencies. So these people are clueless. And this person's wearing a yarmulke. The next picture here says DEI till I die. And I found that quite ironic as well, because a lot of people are saying that these DEI hires, like especially in the airline industry, are resulting in people dying. When you put people who are into jobs that are only qualified because of their skin color, not because of their actual skills, in a lot of these essential critical jobs, like firefighters in LA, for example, putting in the female fire chief, it may actually result in death. And so I find that sign quite ironic as well. And possibly the most ironic photo of all, this is one they would never show you in any mainstream liberal media, is all these people stuffing their signs in the garbage when they're done with this protest. And so it's like, honestly, like I saved signs from January 6th. If I'm at a protest that I really care about, like I'm going to save the sign as a memento. But I think it's slightly funny that, all these people turn out for this big protest and then like they just overflow and jam them all in the garbage can when they're done. It's like it didn't really mean enough to them to memorialize it. So I found that pretty ironic. And that essentially ends. Well, let's see. What else did it say? Since President Trump took office in January, various protests have taken place against his administration's plans and policies, from the mass firing of federal workers to immigration raids to the involvement of billionaire Elon Musk in the federal government. Saturday's protests appeared to be the most widespread to date of Trump's second term. Quote, there are many issues, said Kelly Laird from Rockville, MD, who attended a rally in Washington, D.C. On Saturday, they're coming after education, coming after healthcare, coming after the arts, coming after the press. Boo-hoo. I don't know why the federal government has to be involved in half of those things. In D.C., thousands filled the grass near the Washington Monument, holding up signs supporting reproductive rights, LGBTQ, Social Security, veterans benefits, and opposing tariffs. Now, this was an interesting quote from the NPR article right here that I'll end this with, was Alan Bev Millenstein were among the passengers in a 3-bus caravan that traveled to the DC rally from Charlottesville, VA, organized by the group Indivisible Charlottesville. So I'm sure Indivisible Charlottesville is just one of many of these activist groups that are all controlled in some kind of a pyramidal structure under the Soros organization, under Open Societies Foundation, under BLM, under whatever they call it. They always change the name of these things, but any group you're a part of, especially activist group or militia, you always got to look at the top and see, who is the top people in this group taking orders from, because there still exists clearly some kind of a very large pyramidal structure that's organizing many different diverse interest groups and activist groups on the left, and I would say on the right as well. And so this whole thing of hands off is just very fake, very staged, very contrived. Of course, there are a lot of people that are upset with Trump, but they haven't done their research and they're being misguided by the leaders of these organizations. So on a last note here, I tweeted out on April 4th, the left, funded by Soros, has gone from Antifa to BLM to Mask Nazi to Vax Nazi to stand with Ukraine to save Palestine to burn Tesla. Am I forgetting anything? And the last one we can add to that list is hands off. Nothing seems to stick. The right has just been MAGA this whole time. So I guess you could say the left has just been TDS this whole time. So that's pretty much it. And, there are a couple other stories from the past few weeks that were maybe worth noting, but so cringely, it's almost hard to even bring it up. One of those being Cory Booker setting the record for the longest Senate speech in history, the longest TDS rant in history as well. This was reported all over the news. He spoke for 25 hours straight, part of which was complete nonsense. I heard that midway through, he was just talking about sports and just wasting people's time. And I don't think it should be allowed that, paid public representatives should be able to waste time in the Senate like this. This is called filibustering, I believe. But at the same time, you're wasting taxpayer dollars by doing this. And so it's not right. And the very last story I have here, which is more of kind of like a culture story here, which you don't always report on at New Templars. But this was a very sad and disturbing news. One of the other reasons why maybe I'm feeling a little bit black-pilled is like these general trends of industry and culture seem to be going in a darker, more totalitarian, less fun direction. And so this was a story on Drudge a couple days ago talking about why are all these clubs closing. And essentially this was saying that, many of the even very popular clubs this was about Brooklyn, but I've seen articles about the same phenomenon happening in England and Germany and all across the world, is that nightlife is essentially dying. And a big part of the reason is rent. And what this article won't say is that a big part of the reason behind that is the landlords. And in New York, at least, in the most case, it happens to be Jewish landlords. But rent and insurance has skyrocketed. In the example given by this article of the club that they're talking about called Paragon in Brooklyn, their insurance had gone from something like $5,000 a month to $25,000 a month, on the off chance that someone would get drunk at their venue and then, kill or attack or, get in an accident later with someone else on the street. Apparently now courts can find the venue they came from originally responsible, which is raising their insurance rates. So this is like lawfare against, against venues, essentially. And the final factor in this is decreasing alcohol sales, which that's the one positive sign in all of this, I would say, because I'm very much opposed to drinking culture and alcohol consumption in connection with nightlife. I believe in partying. I believe in other funner substances are out there that are less toxic. I'm not like a Puritan, but alcohol is just a really bad one. And so I like that there's less alcohol, but I don't like that nightlife is dying. I don't like that landlords are essentially evicting nightclubs and fun venues that are doing well and creating community and creating culture. And I also don't like that insurance companies are the other reason for this. And, a lot of that is Jewish owned, unfortunately. And so I want to see a world where people can play and have fun and where, fostering that kind of environment, being a club owner, supporting that kind of environment will be a profitable, proposition. And for these reasons, these clubs are closing. It's not because people don't want to have fun or they're not popular places. It's these bullshit reasons that, to me, it just says cabal shutting down the fun. So that's too bad. But hopefully in the golden age, insurance and rent gouging will be a thing of the past. And so there will be a future for nightlife yet. And one of my long-term goals may actually be to be some kind of a club owner. It's always been sort of a goal of mine to have a little club of my own where we promote enlightenment and conversation, as well as dancing and fun and performance arts, all in the same venue. So that is the news for this week. Like I said in the beginning, I'm somewhere in between black-pilled and red-pilled, but the main thing is I'm not forming my opinions based on, repeating from one source. I'm looking at everything. I'm seeing the trends, and, there's some things I'm concerned about and some things that I'm very hopeful for. So I'm being honest, I'm not dealing you guys the hopium, and I'm not dealing you guys the pure pessimism either. And I think that is a reasonable place to be. And so I'm going to hang in there, and you hang in there too. And we'll see if this was the bottom and how soon this golden age is going to get kicked off. And we'll also see you on the next video, New Templars.
He could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think.
You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
Welcome to the future of finance. Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people.
With the Karl reflects what storm is affected? You'll find out. You'll find out.
Just now we saw a black triangular craft fly, right?